Welcome back to the Missing 411 podcast. Tonight we are deep diving into one of the most compelling and terrifying accounts of sustained creature activity we have ever documented. This story spans decades, affects multiple family members, and is intimately tied to a piece of Michigan land with a deeply unsettling history and a whisper of something ancient. Our witness, whom we'll call Joe, started with an advantage that most victims of these phenomena do not have. His auntie was a trained wildlife biologist, which gave Joe a foundational knowledge of animal behavior. He knew that when confronted by a large predator, one of the most important rules is simply to not run. This basic instinct to stand his ground in the face of terror may very well have saved his life when the time came. Joe reflected on his peers, noting that many of his friends were not equipped mentally or emotionally to handle what he endured. He felt that the experience would have completely destroyed them, leaving deep psychological scars. Joe credits his own resilience for overcoming what he called, "quite a lot in my life," enabling him to emerge without the major emotional damage that might be expected. The true mystery begins not with Joe's physical encounters, but with his younger brother's childhood nightmares. Long before Joe ever saw the creature, his brother was plagued by frequent recurring dreams of being chased by a terrifying wolf. The chilling part is that in every single dream, Joe was there trying desperately to pull his brother away and save him from the pursuing beast. Joe was stunned to hear this confession years later, because he had never once told his brother about his own horrifying encounter. Furthermore, any possibility of external influence like local folklore was ruled out. The old nanny who might have told them stories had been deceased before his brother was old enough to even remember her. This leads us immediately to the question of a deep unseen link. Was something happening telepathically between the brothers, or was this a temporal anomaly, a psychic echo of a future event? We believe such intense psychic phenomena spanning time point towards a dimensional rift, a thin spot in reality that centers on that Michigan property. This rift acts as a beacon for these cryptic predators. This powerful entity, call it an ancient intelligence or a localized tear in spacetime, is the true owner of that land, attracting these terrifying creatures and causing the psychic distress. This underlying force links the brothers' premonitory nightmares to Joe's later physical terror in a way science cannot explain. Joe's advice for anyone who has an encounter is simple but profound. Do not hold it in. Joe spoke from personal experience when he shared that suppressing the memory and the fear for years and decades only tortures the victim. There is a community of people who have had similar encounters who are more than willing to listen and provide support. It is a huge weight off of your shoulders to share the story, and it is a necessary part of processing the trauma. Joe's encounters began in 2016, but the terror intensified when his neighbor Mr. J became involved a year and a half after Joe first reached out to us. Mr. J, who lives directly across from the family farm, was violently awakened at 2:38 a.m. by a sudden tapping sound at his bedroom window. He looked out, but the motion light only gave him fleeting glimpses of the darkness. The next morning, Mr. J found definitive evidence that something monstrous was loose in their quiet rural community. Near his chicken coop lay the grisly sight of only half of a deer. When he tried to remove the carcass, he found it was already gone, but left behind were large wolf prints much bigger than a coyote's, heading deep into the nearby Cedar Grove woods. Adding to the mystery, Mr. J confessed to hearing strange, powerful howls emanating from the direction of Joe's family farm. These unsettling vocalizations occur with disturbing regularity, specifically on Wednesdays or Sundays, lending a ritualistic, almost calculated feel to the creature's activities. Joe questioned if this indicated a large population or just a small but intensely territorial group. The land itself has a deep history of unease and dread long preceding Joe's family's arrival. Two local farmers who considered building on the property chose to build elsewhere after discovering the presence of Indian burial grounds scattered throughout the area. They immediately got a very bad vibe, a distinct feeling of a pervasive negative energy. The farmers described the feeling as one of a curse, noting that something about the land made it fundamentally unsuitable for farming or settling. Joe's grandfather purchased the property in 1977 and built the house quickly, perhaps to preempt any warnings or just drawn by the property's natural beauty, including the spring-fed Flower Creek. The ancient burial grounds are not confined to a distant corner but are startlingly close. Literally a 5-minute walk from the house. This close proximity to a disturbed sacred site aligns perfectly with many missing 411 cases where unexplained phenomena congregate around significant geological or historical anomalies, often suggesting an interdimensional component. Joe's first encounter occurred in early 2016 late one stormy night while he was shoveling heavy wet snow from his long driveway. Taking a moment to rest, he heard a sudden unnatural splash in the creek that ran beneath his driveway bridge. He quickly scanned the water, but it was silent and empty. Then, in the periphery of his vision, he caught a terrifying flash of movement. It was a creature moving rapidly on all fours. He instantly identified two red eyes that glowed menacingly about 4 feet off the ground, an unnatural height for any known nocturnal animal. The creature possessed a massive head described as being like a huge gray wolf, but it wore a coat that was distinctly grayish with flashes of white along the head and shoulders. It moved incredibly quickly, taking off to the west with the sound of snapping tree limbs marking its rapid retreat. It remained on all fours, never adopting a bipedal stance. Joe was only 45 to 50 yards away when he saw the creature, and the sight was so unsettling, he left the rest of the driveway snow to be shoveled at daybreak. When he finally told his Aunt Denise, his only source of wildlife knowledge, her initial response was harsh. She immediately called him a lunatic and told him these things only exist in movies. The denial from his family only served to isolate Joe further, but shortly thereafter his aunt had her own chilling experience. She was returning home late one night when she heard a pretty ungodly howl, or a screech and a howl that sounded precisely like a wolf. When Joe asked if it was what he saw, her reaction was a sudden petrified silence. She became noticeably jittery and uncomfortable for days afterward, confirming that the sound had profoundly disturbed her, even if she wouldn't admit a connection to Joe's story. This acoustic confirmation was the first sign that Joe was not hallucinating. Furthermore, Joe began finding strange man-made structures in the woods. One structure was a small 3 to 4 foot high lookout made of sticks and limbs positioned strategically near the creek bank. It seemed designed for something to stand inside, partially concealed, while maintaining a clear view of the surrounding property. The construction showed a deliberate tactical intelligence. Even more unusual was a second structure found close by, described as being almost woven like a nest right into the ground itself. This woven basket-like nest measured about 6 feet by 5 feet, indicating it was large enough to accommodate a full-grown creature or perhaps serve as a den for smaller individuals. These were not natural formations. The second encounter occurred in February 2016 on a cold winter day. Joe was walking the creek armed with his single-shot .410 when he spotted what he initially mistook for a black bear digging into the creek bank. As he positioned himself, a small limb snapped under his foot. The wind immediately shifted, carrying Joe's scent, and the creature looked over its left shoulder. In that instant, Joe knew this was no bear. It had the distinct shape of a German shepherd's head, and its eyes were a fierce yellowish-amber mix. He was rooted to the spot by sheer terror. The creature then did the unthinkable. It rose slowly to its full height on 2 legs, bipedal, and turned to face him completely. Joe estimates this black-furred beast stood easily 7.5 feet tall and weighed between 350 to 380 pounds, with massive hands and feet tipped with sharp claws. They engaged in a silent, terrifying stare-down lasting 2 to 3 full minutes. Just before it moved, the creature pinned its ears back against its skull like an enraged cat, a clear sign of extreme aggression and threat. It then launched itself away, moving with incredible speed and power, thrashing through the thicket like a true werewolf. The sudden noise faded quickly, and once again the woods fell into a supernatural quiet. A dead silence where not a single bird chirped or a squirrel moved. This eerie silence, coupled with the putrid stench, was a hallmark of its presence, described as a mix of wet dog and light guts or a skunk. This second encounter shook Joe to his core more than the first one. The sheer scale and aggression of the bipedal figure and the deliberate pinning of its ears were clearly intended as a warning. Joe was trespassing. The trauma was so severe that he avoided the woods for 2 full months afterward. During this period of fear, Joe began to hear the creature actively engaging with the house. He heard tapping on the basement window, a sound like a fingernail dragging across the painted glass. Despite the terrifying nature of the sound, Joe could never bring himself to pull back the drapes and see what was on the other side. The third encounter occurred in July 2016. Joe was walking the woods when he was overwhelmed by a potent rotting carcass smell, which he initially tried to rationalize as a dead deer. But as he got closer to the creek ridge, he saw a sudden movement, a dark blur behind a tree. Standing perfectly still next to a tree was another creature, all black and bipedal just like the second one. It was a silent sentinel, its ears up on high alert, staring directly at Joe from 60 yards away on the opposite bank of the creek. It was simply watching, waiting, and judging. Joe froze, knowing that running would trigger a lethal chase. He slowly began backing away toward the house, losing sight of the creature, but immediately felt an intense sensation of being actively stalked. The woods once again became completely silent, reinforcing the idea that this thing was hunting him. The fourth and final major encounter took place in November of that year. Joe was preparing his hunting blind when the familiar sequence began. The sounds of the woods died away, the birds vanished, and the putrid smell rolled in. He immediately began packing up his gear, knowing what was coming next. As he headed north, something darted through a clearing too fast to properly identify. Then from the west came a loud snap, followed by a terrifying low guttural growl so powerful it literally felt as though it shook the ground around him. This was not a warning. It was a physical manifestation of threat. Through a small clearing, Joe spotted it. A large wolf-like black head and ears looking out from behind a white ponderosa pine. It was leaning against the tree, staring at him just like the sentinel from the third encounter. Joe fled toward the soybean field in sheer panic. As Joe raced through the field, he saw the dark shape keeping perfect pace with him along the woodline step for step. As he reached the slight incline leading up to the house, he turned for one last look and saw the figure standing 6 or 7 feet high, leaning against the ponderosa pine, watching him. He estimated it was 200 yards away and standing completely motionless, its golden amber eyes fixed on him. As he opened the slider door to rush inside, the creature delivered its final menacing message. An ungodly howl that was part wolf and part screech ripping through the fading twilight air. The family dog, Hankers, a large Newfoundland, instantly went ballistic, barking uncontrollably inside. When Joe finally let the dog out, Hankers only relieved himself quickly before turning toward the woodline and growling continuously, unwilling to leave the threat unaddressed. Joe had to physically drag him back into the house. The sheer scale of the creature's aggression was later confirmed by the physical damage done to the property. An old trailer was violently ripped apart, with panels found scattered far away, and even lodged 3 feet up a tree on the northern woodline. The windows were smashed, and an old van bore powerful fist-like indents on its metal side. Joe interprets this as a clear message of territorial dominance, an active attempt to frighten his family away. Leave that property. The damage was so extensive that Joe truly believes the house and land are afflicted by a curse of some sort tied to the ancient presence there. Before he left, Joe had moved to Florida, but he learned that the creatures were reproducing. The neighbor, Mr. J, reported seeing a small creature only 3 to 4 feet high moving bipedally and incredibly fast up a ridge near the creek. He described it as a dog with a human body. Joe also made a disturbing discovery in the soybean field, a hole where he found a cache of 6 cat skulls, all from house cats placed together. This macabre collection strongly suggests that the dogman is intelligent enough to cache its kills, returning to feed on its prey at a later time. The toll on the community's pets was immense. Mr. J alone lost 36 chickens, 47 ducks, a beagle, and 2 golden doodles over 2 to 3 years. In another frightening incident, a friend's cat named Albert was found violently shaking and clinging to the very top of a 60-foot oak tree, completely terrified and unable to descend. And then there is the dark shadow of the missing hunter. Joe heard local talk about a family friend's grandson who vanished while rifle hunting in November 2014. He was never found, and no report was ever made publicly linking his disappearance to any known cause, a chilling parallel to dogman activity. The fear became deeply personal for Joe's father, a lifelong hunter. After his encounter with the stalker, he came home white as a ghost and stayed in bed for 4 days, unwilling to return to the woods for the rest of the season. The event profoundly broke his spirit and ended his hunting career. Joe himself suffers from recurring nightmares 6 months after leaving the property. The nightmares always lead him into the family woods, where the dogman runs full bore at him on all fours. He consistently wakes up just at the precise moment the creature leaps to attack, an exhausting cycle of trauma. When asked if he viewed his experience as a curse or a blessing, Joe offered a surprisingly profound answer. He sees it as more of a blessing. It gave him personal closure to know what he saw was real. He now possesses a knowledge that others choose to dismiss as fantasy. Joe concluded with a final thought on the sheer reality of these encounters. He acknowledged that the experience messes with your mind and forces you to confront the unsettling question. If these cryptid horrors are real and actively hunting, what else truly is out there beyond the veil of our accepted reality? Joe's story of the Michigan Dogman is more than a creature encounter. It is a case file of intense territoriality, psychic echoes, and environmental intimidation that echoes the darkest corners of the missing 411 phenomena. We thank him for his courage in sharing this terrifying piece of his life and helping us to understand the strange darkness that surrounds these places.